They were a majority in many church congregations, the emergence of a larger middle class in the North, the passage of the Alien and Sedition Acts, which limited rights for foreign-born residents. They were assured that the Bill of Rights would be added shortly after ratification, banning discussion of the anti-slavery petitions. They called for expanded women's rights. For most of the war, they were paid less than white soldiers of equal rank. Transporting African Americans to Africa. Spread of corn cultivation. Restrictions on Catholics holding public office. French military and financial assistance. The right of nullification. Challenged the religious beliefs of the colony's leaders. Provide for statehood for Western territories. Relations with American Indians and restriction on the fur trade. Forestalled the possibility of European intervention. Placed limits on the socio-economic opportunities open to black people. Developed a national economy by improving transportation. The United States Supreme Court. Establishment of a public school system. All the colonies. The introduction of tobacco cultivation. Were royal colonies. The diets of Europeans improved. The King of England and the principle of monarchy. Passage of a tougher National Fugitive Slave Act. The Constitution's checks and balances helped establish a stable government. An electoral college. Republican motherhood. France. Increased right for women. Missouri Compromise. It stated that black people were not citizens of the United States. It held that the federal government had no power to regulate slavery in federal territories acquired after the creation of the United States. Expand their commercial and mercantile network. Spread of sharecropping. Introduction of interchangeable parts. It disrupted American shipping. The Spanish developed a race-based caste system that defined the status of Europeans, Native Americans, Africans, and the people of mixed race in the colonies. The economic system explored the labor of Native Americans, whereas slavery more typically extracted labor from enslaved Africans. The Union victory in the Civil War led to ratification of the 13th Amendment. To seek economic opportunity and improved living conditions, the use of enslaved Native Americans and Africans to meet the labor demands of colonial agricultural productions. The Mexican-American War incorporated extensive new lands into the U.S., attained ratification of the Constitution, that suffrage cannot be denied based on race, color, or previous servitude, nullification of all private debts to the United States. Kansas. The rise in manufacturing in the North coincided with an increase of immigration from abroad to these urban areas. It resulted in divisions both the Congregational and Presbyterian churches. Asia. Protecting legislation guaranteeing civil rights to former slaves. Require the North American colonies to pay a greater share of the empire's administrative expenses. Advocating immediate and uncompensated emancipation. Levy taxes. Only a unicameral legislature. An increased fear of slave revolts in the South. Establish the financial stability and credit to the new government. Call for direct subsidies to manufacturers, Eastern merchants. Landscapes. Change to property ownership requirements. To create economic and diplomatic relationships between Europeans and Native Americans. A joint stock company anxious to return a profit to investors, reducing the scope of activities of the federal government, promote urban mercantile interests at the expense of agricultural interests, the Missouri Compromise in 1820, allow people living in a territory to determine whether slavery should be permitted there. The authority of the state government included the power to decide whether or not an act of Congress was constitutional. States' rights. Navigation Acts. The home and the workplace become separated. Women were increasingly expected to be responsible for housework and childcare, while men took jobs outside the home. Commerce and industry would declare as the nation expanded its agricultural base. The Supreme Court was the authority to determine the constitutionality of congressional acts, and increased federal authority by invoking the doctrine of implied powers, regulated colonial shipping and tobacco production. European powers should not pursue any future colonization in the Americas, relied on the use of power-driven machinery. Indentured servants. 1821. Continued debates over the proper role of the federal government. A model community promoting government by strict religious principles. Virtual representation. They were willing to accept slavery where it existed, but opposed a further expansion to the territories. Protective tariffs. The extension of suffrage rights to most adult white men. A participatory democracy expanded belief in the importance of the individual. Allowed the U.S. to use the port of New Orleans. Expanded white male suffrage, broadened participation in elections. Avoid conflict with the Trans-Appalachian Indians. Prevent conflicts with American Indians on their colonial frontier. The idea that mothers were responsible for instilling good citizenship values in children. Slavery could remain where it existed, but should not extend into territories or new states. Greater population and industrial development. Election of 1860. An editor could not be punished for seditions libel if editors were accurate. Collecting money, medicine, and food to supply the Continental Army. A plan prohibited and expanded textile manufacturing activities. Individual conduct should be guided by truths funded in the individual conscience. He believed that Reconstruction was an executive branch matter and sought the rapid restoration of the former Confederate States to the Union. Increased geographical mobility, aided travel to new regions, and the sharing offices. The Spanish used both labor systems for plantation agriculture as well as for making their American colonies. They weakened the protections given to African Americans under the 14th Amendment. Flee to Florida, where the Spanish offered freedom. Weaken and deflect Republican criticism of the Federalists. Promoting trade and communication with the Old Northwest. Guarantee that the British government would have a financial share of all colonial exports. A large republic offered the best protection of minority rights. Temperance.